let's talk about kerning and letter spacing. Those controls are up here. They're also, just say, hey, and by the way, because they relate to characters, they are here in your character style. No, whoops, sorry. Here and here. This one, this one is kerning, and this one is tracking. Kerning is the space between the words. Tracking is the space between the letters. So let's see what we have here. First of all, and as I mentioned to you in class, I use optical. Watch me change this. You can see how it changes. Metric, you have two choices. You have metrics. Let me grab this. You have metrics and you have optical. Metrics is a mathematical way to do it. Optical, as the name implies, maybe everything isn't completely the same, but it's basically kind of tweaking the typeface so it looks good. So that's the one I use. And again, I make sure that's set in my paragraph style. I'll show you where that is. If we go into body copy and we go into basic character formats, you can set the kerning to either optical or metrics or none if you want to. And by the way, here's where the tracking is set. So when we do tracking is something you do, you can do a little or a lot. So as an example, if I add +10, I've added a tiny little bit of space between every single one of the letters and the words. Sometimes if I'm setting type and the typeface, we talked about X heights in class, if it's a typeface that sets very tightly, some typefaces just have a tighter set than others, I'll just go into my paragraph style and give it, right from jump, I'll give it a +10 track, just so that it's a little more readable, just so that people aren't saying, what does that word say? It's just something that you have to look at the type and say, is it readable? Do I need to add a little air between the letters, between the, we've already talked about letting and the space between the lines, right? Now we're talking about the space between these letters. The other way that you can use the tracking, when you are setting particularly large pieces of type, you want to watch out for these tracking pairs. And again, it depends on the typeface you're using. Let's talk about the A and the W. It's usually A's and W's and A's and V's. I'll get rid of the M's. Sometimes in some typefaces it can be the M's and the N's. But do you see, if I make this into kind of a word, see how nice and tight that tracking is? Because this A goes this way diagonally and this V goes this way diagonally. There's a lot of extra air between here. And so I'm going to set my cursor down and I'm going to cheat this in. I'm going to put my finger on the Option key and I'm going to put my finger on the other side of the keyboard on the arrow that points to the left. And I'm going to track this in. You notice it's going in increments. I'm kerning this in by hand. See that? And as I mentioned to you, once you have mastered the art of kerning a headline, of understanding, here, let me put an O in here, let's see. So now, see how tight that O is? That's way too tight. So I'm going to send that back. You want everything to look like if you had a glass of water and you poured the glass of water between the letters, it would always take up the same space. You don't want to be able to drive a truck through the space, is basically what we're talking about here. And once you see bad kerning, you will never be able to unsee it. As I mentioned in class, go look at some of the posters in the MTA down in the subway, and you will see some truly horrific examples. I think there's actually a Tumblr, there may be an Instagram account for bad kerning, where the kerning is so bad it actually makes the words look like different words. Trust me, once you start setting type, this becomes your blessing and your curse.